Welcome! In this series of short videos, we will look at topics for the PowerBasic Windows compiler. Today we will look at how to set up drag and drop on Windows Forms. Today we are going to have a look at the basics of drag and drop within your PowerBasic Windows compiler. You may well have already used drag and drop within File Manager to copy or to move files around. We are going to amend the application to allow files to be dropped upon it, to anywhere inside the form. So let's have a look at the code to see how that can be done. If we have a look first of all at the Forms Designer, so we will indeed see that this is a simple form. There's nothing special about the dialog itself. It's set to be centered on the screen. The text box has only been changed to set it to be multi-line. This will allow it to accept multiple lines of text in the text box. The first thing we need to do to enable drag and drop is in this function. This is a function that creates the dialog itself. In here we're using the dialog new command to position the dialog on screen. And the return from this passes a value to this variable, the HDLG variable. This is the handle of the dialog. We're going to be using this to set up our ability to accept files dragged onto the dialog. Further down the code, we're actually showing the dialog on screen. We'll need to use a Windows API call immediately before this to allow us to set the dialog up to accept files dragged upon it. You can do a great deal with Windows API calls, as they hook directly into the operating system. The first one we're going to use is an API call called drag accept files. This API call takes only two parameters. The first parameter is the handle to the dialog. The second parameter is either going to be a true or a false. If the value is true, we are setting the dialog to accept files dragged upon it. If the value is false, then you are setting the dialog not to accept files dragged upon it. So having set this up in the dialog creation, we now have to set up an event. This event will handle what happens when something is actually dragged on to the dialog. So let's have a look at the callback function where the events are handled. In here we need to create a new event. This is going to be the WM drop files event. Any file dropped upon the dialog will trigger this event. It's quite possible if someone's dragging something from, say example, File Manager, they may be dragging one or more than one files. So the first thing we need to do is to work out how many objects are being dropped upon the dialog. There's another Windows API call we can use to work that out. And that API call is called drag query file. This API call will return the number of objects that are being dragged onto our dialog. So now that we know how many files are being dragged onto the dialog, we now have to step through this collection of files one at a time to determine the name of the file and the path to the file. So we're going to do a for next loop here. The collection will start at item number 0. So we're going from item number 0 to the long file count -1, which will be each of the objects we're actually receiving. And we're going to use another API call called drag query file. We'll declare all these variables in a moment, but what we're doing here is we're passing a number of parameters to this API call. The CBW param, the item number we're looking to get, and the variable into which we want to put that value. This will give us both the name and the path to the file. So having got the name and the path to the file, in order to see that we've actually received something, we're going to update this text box on screen. So we will build up a list of files. And after we've finished the for next loop, we will then update our text box on screen by simply updating it and sending it strlist. So we will create those variables at the top of our function. And let's try running that code now. So the application runs quite happily. I've created the text box with a fairly large font so you'll be able to see what's happening. So if we bring on screen File Manager, and we're going to drag one of these files onto our dialog. And you'll see the icon changes to a little plus sign. If we let it go, then the path and the name of the file we've dragged will appear on our dialog. If we select more than one file and attempt to drag them, it will show each of the files, one after the other. So we've now successfully managed to open File Manager, drag one or more files onto our dialog, and the name and the path of the file is actually passed to our application, and we're displaying this to the user. So now that we have that information inside the application, we can actually do something with it. One of the good uses for drag and drop is to drag a file into one of your applications and to do something with that file. This would save the user browsing to where the file is actually located, as they may find drag and drop much faster. So let's look at the code to see how we can amend that to show the information in a file inside our text box. If we're dragging more than one file, it would be difficult to show all 2 or 3 or more files inside the one text box. So we're going to amend our code so that if only one file is actually dragged, and if that file has an extension of .bas, we're going to display that in the text box. So we can do that quite easily by using the file count variable. So if the file count is 1 and the right hand 4 characters of the file that has been passed is .bas, then we know we've been passed a basic file. So at that point we can add to our list just the one thing. So we're going to use one of the functions in our file handling library called binary file as string. This will take the file and copy the entire contents of the file into the strList variable. The str file name, you'll notice, is not an ordinary string. Because this is something we're using with the Windows API, it's a string Z, a fixed length string, to be the size of the maximum length of a path in Windows. And as the binary file as string is expecting an ordinary dynamic string, I'm doing this by simply adding a zlin string to it and letting PowerBasic handle that quite happily on its own. The other thing that is best to do once we know we have finished the drag and drop is to call the drag finish API call. This lets Windows know that we have finished dragging objects onto this dialog. So if we run our application now, and we drag multiple files onto the dialog, it will still appear as before. However, if we drag just a .bas file onto the dialog, it will display the content of the file itself. So with merely using 3 API calls, you can achieve drag and drop on your application. If you have an application that's designed to display text files or any other type of file, you can now set it up so that it can be dragged onto your application and your application can then open the file. This has been a short introduction to drag and drop. There is much more we can cover, but we will leave that for a later video. That's it for today. Thank you for watching.